Alright, what's up YouTube? My name is Crypt13 and today we are going to be looking at pros and cons for both Childe and Hu Tao. Both of their banners are coming up in the next 2.2 update, so I thought that this would be a good video for people that are thinking about pulling for either of those characters. You'd probably want to know what they excel at and kind of what their problems are, or kind of just things that are annoying with those characters. Not every character is perfect in this game, and every character has pros and cons to them. We're gonna start off with Childe here, and before we jump into that, I am over on Twitch. That's where I'm doing this video, so if you want to check me out, then go ahead and give me a follow over there. I also launched a new Discord, so if you want to connect with me and talk to me there, then also links are in the description. So let's first talk about Childe. Childe is Foul Legacy Raging Tide, and this can be a problem for some people if you're really bad at managing cooldowns. If you're really bad at managing cooldowns, the maximum cooldown on this can be up to 45 seconds, which is absolutely ridiculous. If you have to wait 45 seconds before you can use Childe's E-skill again, you're just losing a lot of damage, and it's not good. When you play Childe, you have to be able to manage your cooldowns really well. And his C1, since this is now his third banner, if you already have him, maybe you're considering getting his C1. Well, his C1 is not that good at all. It decreases the cooldown of his E-skill by 20%, and that's as long as you're managing your cooldown, you don't really care about this. If you're really bad at managing cooldown, then this is kind of good. But if you're bad at managing cooldown, then, well, you're not playing Childe correctly. That's the truth. So C1, you're really just not going to notice it, and it's definitely not worth it. So if you have Childe already, there's no need to go for C1. And on that same vein, C6 is also not that great. I know that when he first came out, everyone was saying that, oh, you need C6 Childe for him to actually be good, but not really, because of the way that his playstyle is and the way that Genshin Impact is played. It's very quick swappy. As long as you just manage your cooldown pretty well and have a 15-second cooldown on his E-skill so you don't stay in it for too long, just enough, then you're gonna be good. This is going to end up being a little bit redundant because you don't want Tartaglia to actually stay in his melee stance 24/7. You want to be able to switch into your other characters and get some other damage in. Yeah, constellations for Tartaglia, I would say not as worth it as Hu Tao, and we'll get into Hu Tao later. Now, your typical team comp for Childe is probably going to look something like this. This team comp that I have here: Tartaglia, Mr. Tortellini, Xiangling, Bennett, and Kazuha. This is so that Childe basically is going to enable your Xiangling to do insane amounts of vaporized damage. So let's just go ahead and jump into the abyss here and take a look at how that's going to be. So yeah, let's take a look at how a typical Tartaglia team comp kind of works. And yeah, let's see. And then Childe is supposed to apply Hydro really well here and just allow Xiangling to just vape away. And as soon as Xiangling's Pyronado goes away, you will typically want to switch off of your Tartaglia so that you can get your cooldowns back up. Typically, people like to swirl the Hydro, but I like to swirl the Pyro because Xiangling just does insane amounts of damage. You can see that each Pyronado hit for 30,000 damage there. So that's kind of how I like to play it, because Xiangling does so much damage. So there's just like a really quick showcase there on how Childe is an enabler for Xiangling and Bennett. And then you bring in Animo just to increase that damage even more. Yeah, and you notice, right, the cooldown there, right? As long as you're managing it pretty well, you are in your E-skill state whenever you want it to be up. So just make sure that you manage that cooldown well enough. And then the next thing is Childe's Riptide is actually really good if you have a grouper. Like, for example, that I have Kazuha on this team. He groups up the enemies really well. So if you have a Kazuha but you don't have Child yet, I think that Child's a pretty good option because Riptide is really strong. But I mean, not only that, Kazuha is also just a really good character to pick up if you don't have him. So let's just try this again. I should actually be using Bennett first there, so I'm actually not doing that correctly. And then usually, right, when I start this rotation, Xiangling starts it off, so since Xiangling starts it off, I vaporize Child's Burst, which has a very high scaling. So this team utilizes elemental reactions really well.
Into the wind. Tidal wave.
Now you see, in terms of damage, Child's actual damage is not super high. We're hitting for 2,000, 3,000, 3,000, 2,000, 3,000. So, like, really, Child's single damage output is not super amazing. It's quite average. So let's see if we can get something a little bit better here. Let's pull them all in again. Let's actually use Bennett first this time. Do this. Get some Pyro on. Vape that. And then after that, let Xiangling do the vapes. So, yeah, that's kind of how you want to play Tartaglia, just like a very high level, and I think it is pretty fun. So, you know, if this is the kind of play style that you're looking for, then Child is definitely the way to go. Let's talk about his free-to-play friendliness and whether or not I think he's actually free-to-play friendly. So first off, in terms of leveling up Child, you really only have to level up 2 of his talents, his E skill and his elemental burst, to get the most damage out of him, because you're not really going to be using his bow mode like at all. The only thing that is kind of interesting here is his Riptide burst damage, so that when you kill an enemy it does extra damage. So that's really the only damage that is useful from his normal attack talent, but he has the Riptide slash here, so it's not that big of a deal. You really only need to level up 2 of these. Other than that, his weapon choices are actually not that free-to-play friendly. So I define free-to-play as being completely free-to-play, so if it requires a battle pass or gacha, that means that it's going to have less points on that free-to-play friendly scale. So in terms of just straight free-to-play, the Prototype Crescent is your choice. And the Prototype Crescent is not that great on Child, because in order to get this extra bonus, you have to shoot an arrow at a weak spot, and it's only going to last for 10 seconds, which isn't super long. Some of his better semi-free-to-play weapons are the Viridescent Hunt and the Rust, but since they're locked behind gacha and the Rust requires a bunch of extra crit rate, that's why I'm putting this as not great free-to-play options. The Black Cliff is also an option that's completely free-to-play, as long as you are spending that dust that you get from gacha. It's okay, it's not great. So in terms of weapons, Child's weapons are not super free-to-play friendly. However, in terms of artifacts, Child has a very nice artifact set that's really easily farmable. The 4-piece Heart of Depth set is a set that's really good to farm for because it comes packaged with the Blizzard set, which is also a really good artifact set. So when you're spending your resin farming this set, you are getting 2 really good artifact bonuses that you can use on a lot of different characters. So next, we kind of want to compare him to Kokomi, because Kokomi actually, in my opinion, fills pretty much the same role as a Child. I can literally just go to my team setup right now, swap out Child for Kokomi, and they are pretty much going to fill the same role. And let's actually see how much damage these 2 characters deal. Right, we saw that Child was hitting for about 2,000 or 3,000 per hit. So we can take a look at how much damage Kokomi is dealing per hit and compare them. Because since Tartaglia is coming right after Kokomi banner, your options right now are choosing Kokomi or Child. And I think that there are pros and cons between choosing Kokomi and Child. And we'll get into that a little bit after we compare their damage output. So first off, my child's artifact build was a DPS build, like not an optimal build because it was not 4-piece Heart of Depth. It was a Gladiator's Finale and 2-piece Heart of Depth. And then my Kokomi is running a full-on support set. So we'll see if running a full-on support set can deal similar damage to child. All right, let's compare.
Let's light it up. Go in. Artifact dance into the fire.
The wind knows me. As one with wind and cloud.
All right, Kokomi, do your thing. Kokomi hits for 6,000. 6,000 or 5,000 while she's in her burst mode. So, I mean, if we are just comparing straight damage numbers, and of course, right, there's things we need to think about here, but if we're just comparing straight damage numbers, Kokomi is actually dealing more damage than child. So you definitely want to consider that. You definitely do want to consider that. And then sometimes we are vaping and then we hit for 9,000. So that's pretty good too. But once I finish this, we'll talk about the things that you have to actually consider. So let's go ahead and try to finish this floor real quick. So the thing that we had to consider there is that Kokomi's damage only comes when she is in her elemental burst mode. And elemental burst mode is completely dependent on how well your energy generation is on your team. Whereas with Tartaglia, it was just based on how well you can manage your cooldowns. But sometimes you can't always control energy because depending on the amount of enemies that you fight, then the overall energy generation is less. For example, if you fight bosses, your energy generation is going to be less. And you also have to remember that Riptide scales better when you are fighting a lot more enemies. Her AoE only comes pretty much from her charge attack. Her normal attacks does have a small, very slight amount of AoE, but it's very, very small. And you probably won't be hitting an AoE with your normal attack most of the time. That's something that you have to consider. Kokomi is based on energy. Tartaglia is based on managing cooldowns. Tartaglia has Riptide, but Kokomi seemingly has higher just straight damage numbers than Child. And you definitely saw that on that floor that I just did. And then in terms of actually building Kokomi, right? Her weapons are 100% way easier to build than Child. She has a forgeable 4-star weapon that's definitely hands down one of her best weapons. So this is very easy to build and not reliant on gacha or anything like that. And then in terms of artifacts as well, she's pretty easy to build. She has a lot of different kinds of support and DPS types of builds, whereas Child, you could really only build them for DPS. So Kokomi fills and can fill multiple types of roles. The substats also that you want on this aren't crit, and we know how much of a headache farming for crit substats are. Kokomi, you just need HP, energy recharge, maybe attack percent, and you're happy. And most of the time, those are the stats that you get. So arguably, Kokomi is a lot easier to build than our boy Tartaglia. But at the end of the day, it does just come down to which character you like appearance-wise, but those are definitely the pros and cons that you should think about if you are considering pulling for Child in 2.2. And one more thing that I forgot to mention is that 2.2 is adding corrosion as a new mechanic, not just to the Abyss, but also to the Overworld and just to the new Hound type enemies. So that means healing might become a very important part of your team composition. And Kokomi fills that role. So that is another reason why you might want to pull for Kokomi over Child. And I know that so far as I've been talking, it seems like Kokomi is better than Child, but that is not how I'm trying to spin this. I just want you to know that there are pros and cons between these two characters. Let's start talking about Hu Tao. Hu Tao is a very strong character that is undeniable, even without the Staff of Homa. She can very easily get the highest attack stat out of any character in the game, with her E skill, because her E skill just gives you a straight up flat attack increase based on your maximum HP. When you are comparing characters that have a similar level of investment, her attack stat is very large, very, very large. She just does a lot of damage. And being a pyro character means she can vaporize her attacks, which makes her moves even stronger. Pair that with the fact that Xingqiu is a character in this game, makes her vaporize very, very consistent. And then you can just increase her damage even further with buffers. That's kind of Hu Tao. But Hu Tao obviously is not perfect. She does have problems, and one of those problems is that she's very charge attack reliant. So if you have her at C0, she's going to be eating through a lot of stamina, right? If you're spamming charge attacks, you are going to be using a lot of stamina. Additionally, if you are using your charge attacks and then dash canceling, because you're so used to dash canceling your moves, oh, your stamina is going to just completely get destroyed. So a C0 Hu Tao does run into that problem. And if you are bad at jump canceling, like this, then you're gonna have a bad time. Hu Tao is gonna feel a little bit random and sporadic, and you're gonna feel like you don't have much control over her attacks. So let's jump into floor 12 again with Hu Tao. All right, so Hu Tao. Charge attacks. Let's set everything up real quick. And you see our stamina's out, but our stamina runs out as soon as her E skill's over. So that is a nice thing, is that her stamina does kind of sync up with how her E skill is, and then she has her burst. That has pretty good AoE there. Let's pull them all over in again. Pop this again, and our burst is up already. So that's, her burst charges really quickly. So when people say that she doesn't really have AoE, I don't know if that's really true. She has pretty good AoE with her elemental burst, and it charges really quickly as well, especially if you run a second pyro character. I think that Hu Tao, she charges her burst and has pretty good AoE. And a lot of people say that her DPS is mainly single target, which I largely do agree with in a lot of cases, but it's not always true. You saw there that if I'm able to group them up together, her charge attack will go through and hit multiple enemies. Also, if your positioning is good enough and you can actually charge attack through multiple enemies instead of just mindlessly using your charge attack, you can also hit multiple enemies. So she is definitely more than just a single target DPS, 100%. But you do kind of have to get good at the jump canceling if you are going to be fighting a boss, but she has that flexibility. I think Hu Tao has that flexibility, which is very good. Her C1 makes it so that her charge attack no longer costs stamina, so that is really, really good. So if you already have Hu Tao and you want to get a C1 Hu Tao, I think it's very much worth it. So here, I would be able to actually dash cancel, but since I can't, because I'm going to kill my stamina, I have to not dash. I have to not dash cancel there. And also playing, see there, I just killed 3 enemies with a single charge attack because I was able to group them up. Another thing about Hu Tao is that in order to get max potential from her, you have to play her at around 50% HP, because that's when her passive gets her extra pyro damage bonus. So that's kind of something that you have to manage, and a lot of people don't really manage that. They just kind of play, right? And that's totally fine. But just know that if you're not playing at under 50% HP, you're not actually dealing maximum Hu Tao damage. And also with the new corrosion mechanic, staying below 50% HP could be a little bit risky. If you're not properly managing that, playing Hu Tao can be very risky. Because every time she pops her E-skill, she's going to lose a very large chunk of her HP. Very, very large chunk. And now, one of the most underrated things about Hu Tao is one of her passive skills. Her first passive skill here is when her E skill ends, all of her allies gets a 12% crit rate boost. This is something that flies under the radar of a lot of people. So not only does Hu Tao just provide a lot of damage by herself, she also provides bonus damage to her teammates. 12% crit rate is not anything to scoff at. If you watched my Rosaria video, you'll know how good 15% crit rate can be, depending on the crit rate of your characters. Especially if you're at around 50% or lower crit rate. 20% or not 20, 12% crit rate can give you up to 15% or 20% extra damage. So that's really, really good. And when I say extra damage, I mean average damage, because right, crit rate is RNG and how you hit your crits. But if you were to average your non-crit hits and your crit hits, you get a 20%-ish increase in damage. And so this is what a typical Hu Tao team would look like generally. You could probably replace an Animo character with a shielder if you are afraid of your Hu Tao dying because you're always playing so risky, but this is typically what she's going to look like. Definitely Xingqiu and Hu Tao are best friends. You definitely want to be vaping with her just to get even more damage, but of course you don't have to. Now, in terms of free-to-play friendliness, a lot of people say that Hu Tao does not work unless you have Staff of Homa, which I think is a load of bull. You definitely don't need this weapon for Hu Tao to be good. The Dragon's Bane is a very, very strong option. Although that's tied to gacha, I think it's a fairly easy weapon to obtain, and at higher refinements, it becomes even better. And if you vape with this weapon, it gets absolutely insane. It actually starts competing pretty nicely with the Staff of Homa. Other options are the Deathmatch and the Black Cliff, but they're good options. Black Cliff, you know, is Black Cliff. I don't really like the passive on that because you have to kill enemies. And Hu Tao doesn't really benefit too much from attack percentage because her base attack is really, really low. However, they are options. But Dragon's Bane is definitely her best option, especially if you are using Vaporize. Now, what about in terms of artifacts? She's got some pretty interesting artifact sets that she can choose from, and I think that it's actually pretty free-to-play friendly because you don't need a 4-piece set to make her good. This set that I'm using right now is a pretty decent set. It's not optimal, but it works pretty well, especially if you vape because of this elemental mastery. 4-piece Crimson Witch is pretty good to help for vaping as well. And of course, the new Millis set is out, which gives her extra 20% HP. I haven't done the math yet for that, but I will be looking into how well the Millis set compares to her previous artifact sets that she was good with when she first debuted. More about Hu Tao's constellations. Like I said, C1 is more than just a quality of life. Having no stamina usage on your charge attacks is really strong because you get higher control on how you want to use your Hu Tao's charge attacks. And it makes it so that the required skill to use Hu Tao is a lot easier. Her other constellations are actually also really, really strong as well. This extra Blood Blossom damage, 10% of Hu Tao's max HP. If your Hu Tao has like 30,000 HP, you're dealing an extra 3,000 damage here. So that is quite significant in my opinion. And then her C4 gives another 12% crit rate for 15 seconds. So Hu Tao can give you 24% crit rate to your team. 24% crit rate is absolutely insane. If you can hit 100% crit rate or even like 75 on your other characters, you're going to be hitting a crit like pretty much every single time. And hitting a crit every single time is super valuable. Hu Tao constellations are freaking awesome. Yeah, I think that those are definitely things you all want to think about if you're choosing between Childe and Hu Tao. Just to summarize, for Childe, think about the Kokomi. Think about whether or not you want to go for Kokomi and how much easier it is to build for Kokomi. Think about the new corrosion status. Think about how free-to-play friendly she is. And think about how good crit rate is from Hu Tao. Because crit rate is a very underrated and undervalued skill that kind of goes under a lot of people's radar. Anyway, This has been Crypt13. Thanks for watching. If you made it this far, I really appreciate it. If you leave a like and leave a comment down below, maybe even consider subscribing to the channel because you like what you saw, then I would be very happy. Until next time, I will see you guys later.